When Alice met the Raphus cuculatus in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll did not imagine that he would at the same time propel the dodo to stardom. Until 1865, the dodo was a sort of myth, known only to scientists who had the privilege to study the wingless bird. In 1626, Roland Savary drew a dodo from a stuffed specimen, which had become obese from living in captivity. This image would remain persistent for centuries to come. Distorted over decades by the commercial exploitation of the symbol of extinction, the dodo is used today to catch the eye of tourists visiting its home country, Mauritius. Representations and imagination have prevailed over facts and science. The dodo is also a central figure in the Mauritian coat of arms. It has thus been elevated to a more dignified and symbolical status. In October 2005, scientists unearthed hundreds of dodo bones at Marosonge, the most important site of dodo remains in the southeastern Mauritius, as well as the place where dodo bones were first found in 1865. This would trigger a series of expeditions aiming to discover a world that some thought to be lost forever. Searching for clues as to how the bird lived its life. This year's expedition has been most fruitful. While digging through this window, scientists have made a very exciting discovery.
It's actually the first time that we discovered also the dodo, the hip bones of the dodo, in position when it died. And it was actually lying on its back. And we can learn a lot from it. We can deduce how it died and what happened after it died.
So you can see the way they were laying, the way they were orientated, whether they're face down, face up, were they on their back? Were the animals eating each other? Were they interacting before they died? And the only way we can find this out is actually by coming down from the surface. If you look around here, 4,000 years ago, this place would have been covered in giant tortoises. Tortoises everywhere. They are the dominant animal we find in this fossil locality. Then we have dodos amongst them, parrots, pigeons flying from the air coming down to drink. There have been small songbirds in the trees, fruit bats flying around overhead. And most importantly this time, we'll be beginning to understand the insect record. How many species of insect have been lost? And they would have been buzzing around everywhere. Large beetles this size, all totally gone. And then around the marsh would have been endemic trees only found on Mauritius, and they were dropping their fruits into the water, onto the edges, and these animals would have been feeding on them, drinking the water. It would have been an unbelievable sight. Nothing to what we see now, unfortunately.
Once upon a time, there was a fantastic island in the Indian Ocean, where animals lived under nature's rule only. Giant geckos, the Mauritian blue pigeon, the Commerson owl, the broad-billed parrot, the red rail, the lesser mascarene fruit bat. They're all extinct now, but they used to play an important role in the ecosystem hundreds of years ago. Mauritius was then inhabited by at least 25 endemic bird species, of which only 8 have survived. The most famous of those extinct creatures is the Raphus cuculatus, the dodo. Its cousin, the solitaire, lived on Rodrigues Island and is also extinct.
C'est un animal assez grand, hein, ça fait à peu près 60 cm de haut, qui est aussi gros qu'un gros dindon, mais pas aussi gros qu'on le présente souvent dans les musées. Hein. On le présente comme un animal assez gros, trapu, qui a des problèmes de locomotion, tout ça. Mais en fait, le dodo n'était pas vraiment comme ça, suite à des études qu'on a faites. On voit que ce n'est pas un animal aussi gros qu'on a supposé être. Hein. Et comme elle a disparu très rapidement, on n'a pas eu de description visuelle sur l'immédiat, sauf les premiers croquis seulement des Hollandais.
The dodo was first seen by Portuguese sailors around 1507. When Dutch Vice Admiral Wybrand van Warwick stepped on the island in 1598 and named it Mauritius, these drawings would be the very first visual descriptions of the bird that the Dutch would nickname Valkvogel, wallow bird, or loathsome bird. Unknowingly, the Dutch provoked the demise of the dodo. Their attempt to colonize the island proved to be an ecological disaster. Many species, dodos and tortoises, were hunted to extinction for their flesh, and the introduction of dogs and rats sealed their fate. The last dodo was seen around 1681, although the last reliable report was in 1662. In 1865, during the construction of a railway linking Kuopip to Maibor, diggers found bones at Marosonge, through which the railroad was to pass. These were identified by schoolteacher George Clark as dodo bones. Marosonge thus became famous as a haven for the lost bird. Until June 2007, it was thought that dodos lived on coastal regions. That year, two cavers, Fred and Debbie Stone, explored a cave near Bois-Chéry and Kanaka crater, looking for cave cockroaches. Deep down, they noticed some large bones and informed Dr. Julian Hume.
I've been doing it for 15 years now. To find a specimen in a cave like this is just unbelievable. It's such a rare thing. And there's only one other, and that's in the Mauritius Institute. But the Mauritius Institute specimen was taken and no records were made of where it was taken from, how it died, anything. This specimen, we can tell the position of it, how it died, all sorts of things from the skeleton. It's just amazing. And it's the first one found, and we know which cave it came from, and we can even work out, you know, why it died. But more importantly, it's in the highlands as well. It's the first one in the highlands. Blade there, there's the top of the leg. This is part of the leg. There's backbone there, vertebrae. There's the other femur, although it's, you can see how it's badly crushed, unfortunately, but there's still lots of nice bones there. Okay. That's that one. But it's also important, it shows you the importance of caves, that how many caves have been filled in and potentially had dodos and all sorts of things in them, you know. So it's just by chance this one is still open. And this dodo's got to be at least 400 years old.
400 years.
Yeah. So there's remains of it. It's been laying here for 400 years until today.
But if one is to find information about the dodo, Marosonge is the place to explore. For the past 4 years, an international multidisciplinary team representing 15 different institutes in various countries have been exploring what lies beneath the marsh, a low-lying swamp area in the dry southeastern part of the island. Studying the geology might give answers to the preservation of 4,000-year-old bones. Thus began a series of archaeological activities at the site, which is part of a large area owned by the conglomerate Omnucaine Limited.
Okay, what we have here are groundwater monitoring wells, and we put sensors 2 years ago which measure every 2 hours the groundwater level. So we have a nice idea what the present water system is like, and it tells us a lot about the historical water system in the times of the Dodo, 4,000 years ago. And we get nice timelines of the groundwater level, how it reacts to the rainfall, but also we see the influence of the ocean tides. And we see a groundwater tides here. And that's a conclusion we can draw from that there's a connection between the water system in the Marosonge and the sea level rise. The ocean level. The groundwater is very important for the conservation, also for the bones. We have here permanent high groundwater levels about surface level, and since the bones were here in this marsh, it is conserved under the water, so no oxygen could be degrade the bones. And also we have here at 2 meters depth we have coral sand, and coral sand contains chalk, and bones also chalk, so the water is not acid and do not dissolve the bones, but preserved in a very nice way. What we learn from this data is that we know that it is a permanent lake, but in times of drought, for example 4,000 years ago, there was a mega drought. This was the only freshwater lake in the surroundings. All the animals gathered here, but when then this only freshwater lake contains little and little water, it becomes a little bit brackish, salt, because we are very near to the ocean. The animals start to die. Yeah? They are in bad conditions, and then they are died. And that's we think the key factor of the occurrence of this mass grave.
Where we are now is actually what we call the Dodo polder. It's a piece of reclaimed country within the marsh. And in order to realize this, we made some trenches around it. And out of these trenches there came many fossils. But these fossils came without any context. And now, this year, we are able to pump the water empty and to work layer by layer, centimeter by centimeter, to see how actually the dodos, the giant tortoises, but also the plants, how they lie in the soil. And that allows us to reconstruct how these animals were living, but also how they died. So in 2005, when I discovered it, we just made a hole in the ground and we found loose bones. Then, with the aid of an international research team, including Mauritian scientists, we started to map where the bones were situated. So we made 3 holes in the marsh, and that was in 2006. And then we saw that in each hole it was extremely rich in bones. So rich we found thousands and thousands of bones and other fossils. And we made this polder. But in constructing this polder we were digging out again many fossils. And the aim of this polder was to dig layer by layer by layer in order to retrieve exactly how the bones are lying in the soil. Because so far we only had loose bones. So it took us 2 years to analyze and catalogize and describe the bones we have found while making this polder. And only this year, 2009, we started digging centimeter per centimeter. And that's really unique, because now we can claim we really have can reconstruct, we really see the animal in its dead position, its position when it died.
This is a dodo, the pelvis, I can see that, and it's upside down inside a giant tortoise.
Zo even te weten. Ja.
Here, the mandible of a tortoise, the lower jaw of tortoise.
And it seems as if there are little teeth inside.
There are,
yes. Wow, beautiful. And what's really amazing is the preservation of all the bones. This is a bone fragment, but you can see there are seeds lying around here. And that's the tortoise bones are actually lying in between the seeds.
This is a tortoise shield from an extinct giant tortoise, and you find this almost complete in the soil, in the sand. The condition of the bones is very good, which means that they haven't been disturbed a lot after the animals died, and that we have a big chance of finding almost complete skeletons. And that's very exciting for people like me, because we really want to know why the animals died here, why the dodo died, why the giant tortoises died, and how they all came here.
I see only one half of the shell. Where's the other half?
I think it's still in the dodo polder, but we have to find out next year. And here I have a piece of the dodo beak, so it's the upper part of the beak. And this looks very nice because it still has small details on it, but we haven't found the whole skull yet. And right here I have a piece of the dodo lower jaw. As you can see, they're broken and they're hardly complete, but maybe there is a complete one in the ground. Right here I have a piece of the foot of the dodo. These bones are much bigger, but this is also a small piece of it. Normally they are more complete, it's about this long, but this one is broken at this end. And it's probably because on top of the marsh there have been dumped a lot of rocks in the Second World War to ban out malaria. And we think that disturb the fossils and that they break and they twist and they turn, and that's why we find many fragments of bones. We have found bones of different sizes of tortoises, so we think that there were different sized individuals. We know that there were 2 species of giant tortoises here on Mauritius at the time of the dodo, but we're not still sure what species is what, so we're still studying them. And here I found a very small skull of a tortoise. It's just a very small individual. It may belong to the smaller species, but we don't know yet. We're still studying it.
DNA research has determined that the dodo and the solitaire belong to the pigeon family, known as the columbiforms. The bird's closest living relative is the Nicobar pigeon, which lives in Southeast Asia. Further analysis of the bones recently found will give more information.
We already know what the dodo is now, we know what type of pigeon it is. What we want to do now is we want to see what the dodos did, what their populations were like, how their populations were influenced by things like changes of the climate over the last maybe 6,000 or 7,000 years, and in particular when humans arrived. So what we want to do is try to extract DNA from lots of dodos, and then we'll use this information to predict how the population size is changing through time. So we look at genetic diversity, and when the genetic diversity is very big, then we guess that this means that there was a very large population. When the genetic diversity is very small, then this means that there was a small population. And so we can see the changes in between big genetic diversity and small genetic diversity, and then we correlate this with time, and we can say we had a very large dodo population, then humans turned up, and all of a sudden we had a very small population. And that's one of the questions we're interested in, was how rapidly did the dodos go extinct after humans turned up? Did it take a very, very long time, in which case we'd expect to see a small amount of genetic diversity persisting for a very long time, or was it very quick, in which case we would see lots of diversity and then nothing at all? So we can test this hypothesis using the DNA that we extract from the bones that are coming from these finds, and also that have come from Morsange previously in the museum.
A sharp eye has also revealed the dodo's environment. Trees such as ebony, palms, tombalacoque and pandanus were present in the region. So were a large number of small land snails, bats, arthropods and insects, the most abundant component. Analysis of this small portion of biodiversity will give new insights into the world of the dodo. Fossil insects that were found are dung beetles that would have fed on the dung of dodos or tortoises. Others would have lived in dead wood, on the forest floor or in the swamp before it was filled in.
I worked on those 3 samples and discovered that they were full of all sorts of insects, particularly things like beetles, like ants and wasps and bugs. Some things don't preserve in the fossil record, like butterflies, of course, because they're too soft. But the types of insects that I found were belonging to groups that just don't occur anywhere in the lowlands of Mauritius today. They've gone, and they live much up higher in the mountains. The particular species that were in the samples are probably extinct, and it's only their relatives that now live up in the mountains that remain. Insects can tell you about all sorts of things. They can tell you about the nature of the forest, how thick it was, what the forest floor was like, was there lots of rotting wood, the types of animals that were producing dung, the types of water bodies, whether they were flowing water or whether they were solid, stagnant water bodies. They can tell you about almost everything about the environment in some ways. In the mountains of Mauritius, there will still be hundreds of species of insects that have not been discovered. What we're trying to do is decide whether the specimens we have from the fossil record are likely to be extinct species that are completely gone from the lowland forests, or whether they are possibly species that may remain in the mountains today. Let's take an island like Kauai in Hawaii. It's one of the Hawaiian islands. It's very similar in size, and I have a site called Makawahi Cave, which is in the lowlands, just like Merasange. And in that site we see the same patterns. The native species tend to disappear very early when people arrive. In this case it's Polynesians in prehistory rather than more recently. And what happens is all of those things that were living in this lowland environment completely disappear from that region. And they're replaced by what we might think of as weedy species. Species that are introduced from foreign countries, species that eat things like sugarcane, pests essentially. So we go from a rich lowland native assemblage of insects to a very species poor introduced assemblage. And the interesting thing is that the native assemblages on Kauai and Mauritius are really different, completely different, whereas the introduced assemblages that you get in modern times are actually really similar. So we get the same species traveling around the world, occupying these gone the habitats that have disappeared essentially.
The fantastic discoveries of these insects, many of them are quite small, gives a new dimension to a reconstruction. And I've already thought about this. In fact, it turns out there's been about 15 new species of dung beetle. And these are beetles that collect droppings of animals and roll them into balls and bury them and lay their eggs on the dung. Now, I can see now they were taking advantage of these giant tortoises. So when these tortoises were dropping their droppings, if you like, these dung beetles have been swarming everywhere, collecting up this muck, rolling it into balls and taking it away. So I've now envisaged doing a painting where it would be a close-up scene instead of a big wide open scene of the large birds and other large animals. It would be a very small scene, but just showing that kind of environment where the insects were dominant in a small area.
Were the Dutch sailors responsible for the demise of the dodo? Or did they die as a result of the global drought, which also heralded the downfall of the Egyptian pharaoh's empire? Are we within touching distance of resolving a mystery? So many questions remain to be answered. In the meantime, Mauritius is protecting what is left of the past. Lately, the return of tortoises on its shores has been viewed as encouraging signs that nature hasn't lost its way. Off the southeast coast in the Maibor Bay lies the small island of Île aux Aigrettes. It was declared a nature reserve in 1965. The Mauritian Wildlife Foundation reintroduced the endemic species of birds and reptiles of Mauritius onto the island and aims at restoring the unique habitat to its natural state of 400 years ago. Endangered bird species of Mauritius, such as the pink pigeon, the red cardinal fody and the olive white eye, have found a unique refuge. So have the Telfair skink and the giant Aldabran tortoises. There is hope that part of the dodo's world will be preserved. The quest for the dodo is far from over, and the creation of a clone is still a remote possibility, pertaining more to science fiction than science itself. What is more exciting is that what is left from the dodo's world is intact and still has more secrets to reveal.